Nobody expected a slice of dry bread and a cup of water to ignite a revolution. But when Victor Ramsey boarded that first-class flight to New York, what began as a quiet injustice would unravel into a corporate reckoning. A respected black tech CEO and the soon-to-be majority stakeholder in CrestWings Airlines, Victor was denied the standard meal service in first class and instead handed a plate with a single slice of bread and a cup of water, accompanied by the stewardess's chilling remark, "This meal fits you." While other passengers received champagne and gourmet entrees, Victor quietly documented every slight, every glance, and every word. By the time the wheels touched down at JFK, video footage had gone viral and a private security team met the plane. The airline staff, still unaware of Victor's true identity, were escorted off for questioning. Within 24 hours, Victor called an emergency executive meeting, revealed himself as the new owner, and terminated key staff involved. But he didn't stop there. He announced the creation of WingsEqual, a division tasked with ensuring dignity and fairness for every passenger, regardless of race or background. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about resetting the culture of an entire industry. Because justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's served on a tray with bread and water, and ends with a boardroom rebuilt on accountability. Victor Ramsey arrived at the bustling Denver International Airport wearing a grey hoodie, dark jeans, and a well-worn backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like any other frequent traveler, calm, efficient, and accustomed to the rhythm of business flights. But to the woman behind the first-class check-in counter, his appearance didn't fit the profile she expected. She glanced at his platinum status card, then quickly gestured toward the economy line. "Coach is down there, sir," she said coolly. Victor didn't argue. He simply slid his documents back into his wallet and calmly reminded her, "I'm flying first class." With barely concealed disbelief, she rechecked his reservation and reluctantly handed over his boarding pass. Her tone clipped and mechanical. Victor had seen this dance before, the skepticism, the assumptions. But he had more important things on his mind than correcting someone's prejudice. On board CrestWings Flight CW611, Victor found his seat, 1A, a window seat in the first row of first class. He placed his carry-on overhead and settled in, preparing for the cross-country trip to New York, where a multi-billion-dollar merger awaited. He didn't expect luxury, only the respect and standard treatment that came with the ticket he'd paid for. One his company was partially funding in secret as part of a quality audit tied to the acquisition. But that expectation was upended the moment Sasha Bennett, the lead flight attendant in her late 40s, with frosted blonde hair and a tight, clipped voice, approached his row. While she offered champagne and printed menus to the white men in rows behind him, she paused at Victor's seat with a look of barely masked disdain. "We're short on meals today," she announced curtly, setting down a plate with a lone slice of dry bread and a small plastic cup of water. "This should fit your taste." Her words cut through the air like a blade, and though a few nearby passengers glanced up, no one intervened. Victor remained composed. He didn't ask for another option. He didn't cause a scene. He simply unlocked his phone, took a picture of the meal, and noted her name badge with quiet precision. 2 rows across, Elena Cruz, a 33-year-old Latina journalist heading to a media conference in Manhattan, witnessed the entire exchange. She had boarded minutes earlier, sipping her welcome champagne while scrolling through briefing notes. But now she watched with furrowed brows, uncertain if she should speak up. She'd seen the headlines about implicit bias, about corporate mishandling. But this was her first time watching it unfold so blatantly, so brazenly, just feet away. Something about Victor's calm made her pause. He wasn't surprised, only calculating. She reached for her phone, not to record yet, but to document details in case they were needed later. She had no idea that the man across the aisle wasn't just another passenger. He was Victor Ramsey, the incoming owner of the very airline whose staff had just humiliated him. On his own flight, in his own seat, in his own company. Victor didn't react with outrage, nor did he raise his voice. Instead, he did what any seasoned executive would do. He documented everything. With measured calm, he snapped photos of the meal tray, discreetly captured Sasha's name badge, and pressed record on his phone's voice memo app. Then, without fanfare, he opened a secure chat channel and sent the evidence to Miles, his longtime executive assistant and head of Aureus Systems' anonymous quality assurance team. Miles, monitoring from the company's Denver headquarters, immediately flagged the incident for internal review and looped in legal. Meanwhile, Elena Cruz, still observing from across the aisle, grew increasingly uncomfortable. At first, she wondered if what she saw was just poor service or coincidence, but it quickly became undeniable. While Sasha offered gourmet menus and vintage champagne to the white men seated in rows 1B, 2A, and 2C, she continued to skip Victor's row as if he didn't exist. Eleanor finally leaned over and asked, "Excuse me, why hasn't he been offered a menu?" Her voice was calm but direct. Sasha's expression didn't flinch. "We're out," she said curtly, and without waiting for a response, turned on her heel and continued serving others. Victor remained composed, silently logging the interaction, his expression unreadable, but his fingers steadily tapping on the phone in his lap. Just then, a middle-aged man in a navy blazer and loud cufflinks, seated behind Victor, leaned sideways and muttered with a smirk, "They really let anyone in first class these days, huh?" The man chuckled as if he'd made a clever joke, but no one around him laughed. Eleanor looked sharply in his direction, appalled. The moment hung in the air, heavy and ugly. In the cockpit, Captain Nate Chambers, a veteran pilot with over 20 years in the air, glanced at a flashing message on his flight console, an alert from operations. "Passenger 1A may be a high-level executive. Handle with care." Nate scoffed under his breath and turned to his co-pilot. If he was someone important, they'd have told us by name. With that, he dismissed the message entirely, unaware that he had just bypassed a direct warning from the airline's own transition team. Back in the cabin, Victor kept his gaze fixed on the horizon outside the window. What no one around him knew was that he wasn't just gathering evidence for personal vindication. He was building a case, systematic, thorough, and irrefutable, one that wouldn't just expose individual behavior, but a culture that had allowed it to thrive unchecked. The temperature in the cabin had not changed, but something in the air had. Eleanor could feel it. This wasn't going to be just another uncomfortable incident. This was a slow burn, and the spark had already been lit. With his tray still untouched and the sting of Sasha's dismissiveness lingering in the air, Victor calmly retrieved his tablet from his carry-on and launched a proprietary app, AirWatch Plus, a real-time monitoring platform developed by his own tech firm, Aureus Systems. The software, still in beta and used only by a select few executives, provided encrypted access to in-flight operational data, service activity logs, and ambient audio streams from designated zones within the aircraft. As Victor sifted through the data streams, his suspicions began to solidify. Within seconds, he accessed Sasha Bennett's crew profile and flagged a deeply troubling trend. 2 prior complaints from passengers of color alleging discriminatory service, both of which had been dismissed internally by CrestWings' HR team, with vague resolutions citing misunderstanding and lack of sufficient evidence. But AirWatch Plus didn't rely on vague recollections. It logged everything, and what it captured that day was damning. Through audio analysis and AI-filtered keyword flags, Victor uncovered a chilling sentence quietly muttered by Sasha near the galley. "He probably thinks he deserves the fancy stuff just because he's black." The phrase, tagged and time-stamped, had already been auto-backed up to Aureus's secure legal servers. Victor didn't flinch. He tapped out a brief message to Miles. "Compile legal packet. We proceed the moment we land." Across the aisle, Elena Cruz was still observing, now visibly disturbed. Moments earlier, she had watched Sasha serve a full entree of seared salmon and asparagus to a white male passenger 2 rows behind Victor, yet pass Victor's row again without a word. That was the final straw. Eleanor took out her phone, discreetly angled her camera, and began recording. The footage was clear, Victor seated quietly, being ignored while others were pampered. She didn't post right away. Instead, she added captions, summarized what had happened so far, and saved it in draft. She'd seen how stories like this could vanish if not handled correctly, but this one felt different. It was unfolding in real time, and her instincts as a journalist told her it needed documentation. Meanwhile, Victor continued analyzing the system logs. Not only had Sasha's service entries been irregular, skipping required check-ins for his seat, but the internal messaging between crew members revealed a troubling tone. Phrases like, "He's probably not used to flying up here," and "let's just keep it basic," were logged in the crew service chat. All of it was admissible, all of it preserved. The airline's internal culture, long hidden behind polite scripts and polished ads, was now exposed in raw data and time-stamped recordings. Victor didn't feel anger, he felt clarity. The problem was bigger than one stewardess. It was systemic, protected by indifference and enabled by silence. But not today. Today the silence had been broken, digitally, irrevocably. And the reckoning was no longer a question of if, but when. The wheels touched down at JFK with a gentle screech, but inside Victor Ramsey's mind, the descent marked something far less smooth. The controlled collision of silence and accountability. He remained calm, composed, and utterly unreadable as Sasha, now visibly flustered, approached him with a forced smile and a shaky tone. "Mr. Ramsey," she began, I apologize if there was any misunderstanding earlier." Victor met her eyes only briefly and responded with quiet finality. "Intent doesn't erase impact." Without another word, he collected his belongings and exited the aircraft, where his private security team and chief legal officer, Dana Whitmore, were already waiting at a side terminal entrance. At their signal, Sasha, Captain Nate Chambers, and 2 additional crew members were discreetly escorted from the jet bridge into a conference room set up for an emergency review. Meanwhile, Elena Cruz, now firmly situated as both witness and journalist, received a formal request to join the session as a corroborating observer. Her video, showing the bread and water service, Sasha's dismissive tone, and Victor's silent composure, had already crossed 1 million views online within hours. The hashtag number, "Bread is not first class," was trending on multiple platforms, sparking a flurry of discussions about implicit bias and racial inequality in premium travel. But what no one anticipated was the quiet storm that unfolded once Victor stepped into CrestWings' executive conference suite later that evening. The room fell silent as he entered, not as a passenger, but as the principal investor and soon-to-be controlling shareholder of the airline. Faces turned pale. The same executives who had earlier dismissed internal complaints as PR risks now sat on edge as Victor calmly laid his tablet on the table, opened the AirWatch Plus interface, and tapped through a series of screens displaying time-stamped cabin footage, service logs, crew chat transcripts, and audio files. Every denial, every microaggression, every instance of deliberate mistreatment had been preserved and catalogued with precision. As he presented each piece of evidence, Victor's voice remained even. There was no shouting, no emotional grandstanding, just data and consequences. "This isn't about one bad flight," he said plainly. "It's about a culture you've allowed to fester behind closed doors." Dana stood beside him, distributing printed termination notices for Sasha Bennett and Captain Chambers, both of whom now sat visibly shaken. "Effective immediately," Victor announced. "Both of you are relieved of duty pending federal review. The evidence has been forwarded to the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Division." Nate tried to interject. "I wasn't even in the cabin." But Victor cut him off gently. "You received a direct message identifying me as a VIP and chose to ignore it. That was your moment to lead, and you failed." Sasha didn't speak. Her eyes darted between the images on the screen and the notification vibrating on her phone. Her dismissal had already been filed. Eleanor's testimony, combined with live witness statements from 2 other first-class passengers who had seen and heard everything, sealed the matter. There was no spinning this. The boardroom was quiet except for the soft clicks of Miles syncing files to CrestWings' internal compliance portal. Victor closed the meeting with one final slide, an internal memo titled "Accountability Begins Now." No logos, no branding, just those 3 words and his signature below. A storm had passed through their fleet, not of turbulence in the skies, but of truth that could no longer be denied. Victor didn't stop with terminations. In the days following the incident, he initiated a sweeping cultural reform within CrestWings by launching a new division, WingsEqual, tasked with protecting the rights of underrepresented passengers and enforcing equity-based service protocols across all flights. More than just a symbolic gesture, the department would be staffed with both former passengers who had experienced bias and airline veterans willing to rebuild trust. One of the first hires, Lars Whitmore, the junior flight attendant who had remained silent during Victor's mistreatment, but later came forward with detailed logs and corroborating audio. Victor, recognizing both the weight of Lars's silence and the courage of his eventual honesty, offered him a second chance, not as punishment, but as redemption. Lars was appointed to lead training workshops for cabin crews, helping to unlearn bias and enforce standardized dignity-first service. Meanwhile, Elena Cruz's recording and detailed reporting took on a life of its own. Her article, titled "Bread, Water, and the Price of Silence," was picked up by several major outlets and syndicated nationally, sparking conversations in editorial rooms, news panels, and airline boardrooms alike. She didn't sensationalize the story. Instead, she reframed it. This wasn't about celebrity victimhood or corporate vengeance. It was about what happens when quiet dignity meets unchecked power. Federal regulators from the U.S. Department of Transportation opened a formal investigation into both Sasha Bennett and Captain Nate Chambers. Dormant complaints from previous flights surfaced within days, brought forward by passengers who had once felt too small to be believed. Now, with the spotlight on CrestWings, their stories were finally heard. As the public pressure mounted, Victor was invited to speak on a major morning news program. Seated across from a well-known anchor, he wore a tailored navy suit, no drama in his expression, just clarity. When asked directly about the bread and water incident, Victor didn't indulge in detail. He simply said, "This isn't about me being a CEO. It's about the fact that I had to be one to be heard. And that's a problem." The audience was silent. Then he added, "Every passenger, no matter what they wear, where they're from, or how much they paid, deserves to be treated with basic respect. That's not policy, that's human decency." The clip went viral within hours. Across the country, passengers began sharing their own experiences under the hashtag #Dignity in the Air. Airlines took notice. Several announced immediate revisions to their service protocols. But at CrestWings, the change was more than reactive. It was embedded. Every new hire went through WingsEqual orientation. Anonymous flight audits became standard, and every cabin crew member was reminded someone is always watching, and not every passenger is who they appear to be. For Victor, the goal was never revenge. It was restoration. He didn't want apologies. He wanted a system that didn't need exceptions to be fair. A week later, as he walked through the terminal en route to another flight, this time unannounced and unescorted, no one gave him a second look. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful sign of progress yet. 3 weeks later, Victor Ramsey stood in front of a group of middle school students at a STEM academy in New Orleans. Most of them black and brown kids with wide eyes, eager questions, and dreams as big as the sky. He hadn't come with a slideshow or a speech. He came to listen. But it was a soft-spoken student in the front row who asked the question that stilled the room. How do you make people respect you when they already think you don't deserve it? Victor paused, the weight of that question echoing far beyond the classroom walls. Then he answered, not as a CEO, not as the man who had restructured an airline, but as someone who had lived that very question. You don't need someone else to give you value, he said gently. You just don't accept being treated like you have none. And when you can, you document the truth. Because the truth, when it's clear and undeniable, speaks louder than any title or uniform ever could. The room was silent, not out of confusion, but understanding. Those students didn't need to be told what discrimination felt like. They had seen it in real life, at lunch counters, in classrooms, and on sidewalks. But what they saw in Victor was something rare. Someone who didn't fight with rage, but with readiness. Someone who didn't yell, but proved. And someone who didn't just endure the system, but changed it. Discrimination doesn't always come screaming. Sometimes it arrives as silence, as indifference, or as a single dry piece of bread on a tray where a real meal should be. It hides behind smiles, scripts, and policy. And when it happens, it doesn't just diminish service, it diminishes dignity. But resistance doesn't have to be loud. It can be quiet, methodical, and strategic. It can be a photograph, a timestamp, a line of code, a witness who chooses to speak up. You don't have to shout to make change. You just have to show up with the truth and not back down when it matters. Power is not always about position. You don't need to be a CEO to demand decency. You don't need a platform to say, this isn't right. But if you do have power, if you do hold influence, then silence is complicity. Then your responsibility grows. Because leadership isn't proven in boardrooms. It's proven in moments when no one's watching. When doing the right thing costs more than staying quiet. What Victor Ramsey reminded the world is simple. Justice doesn't always wear a badge or a title. Sometimes it wears a hoodie, carries a backpack, and sits quietly in seat 1A with a plate of dry bread in front of him, until the moment he decides that enough is enough. And when that moment comes, the system won't know what hit it, but everyone watching will never forget what they saw. If you've ever been overlooked because of how you look, where you're from, or because someone thought you didn't belong, then Victor's story isn't just a personal victory. It's a reminder that silence isn't weakness, and being calm doesn't mean being passive. Sometimes all it takes is one photo, one message, one quiet refusal to back down, to shake an entire system to its core. You don't need power to demand justice. You just need to stop accepting injustice as normal. And if stories like this resonate with you, moments where dignity is restored, where the quiet ones rise, where the truth is louder than the noise, then this is just the beginning. X Daily Stories brings you real, powerful narratives that aren't just entertaining, they're awakening. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a moment where the tables turn, where the lesson hits hard, and where justice finally gets served the way it should. Because sometimes a slice of bread isn't just a meal, it's the beginning of a movement, and that movement starts with you.